Hi, this is Paul. Saturday morning, I sort of unleashed a whole tweet storm onto the world about a whole bunch of things. Just had some time Saturday morning, woke up, had a bunch of things on my mind. One of the things that had caught my attention on Friday afternoon was a Gospel Coalition tweet about an article that they wrote. The Gospel Coalition is a reformed group, kind of an evangelical cluster, not really a denomination or anything like that, publishing house or such. A pandemic is a severe mercy because it warns us of worse to come and therefore the urgent need to turn to God. Now, as a Christian minister, I'm very comfortable with that terminology, but I can very much understand others and their reaction to that terminology, that they simply find it unhelpful. I recently did a conversation with Nick, and Nick said pretty much that exact thing, and he's exactly right. I said, how can you, so Nick has been fighting cancer for a number of years, and the conversation's on my page, on my channel, you can find it, and it's really a wonderful conversation, because we're talking about all of these institutions and the failures of them, and I said, well, how do you deal with an institution that you're dependent upon for your health and to live when you've got deep mistrust about the what the doctors are doing? And he just said God. He turns to God, and so on one hand, the Gospel Coalition writes this, and it's absolutely legitimate. On the other hand, I think I have a fairly clear idea why, for many people, that kind of language simply doesn't do it, because it triggers all sorts of other things. And again, Jonathan Peugeot has been having these, I think, really quite remarkable. I know people have found them frustrating. I think the participants have found them more frustrating than some of us listening to them. But what these conversations that Jonathan has been doing, I think, is just simply highlighting the insularity of the church and our inability to frame our experience, our beliefs, our agenda in a way that makes sense and is any way desirable or compelling to the vast majority of people with which we share a world and intend to communicate effectively, to make ourselves known. This has been a long thing in Christianity. Right away, you go back to the church fathers, look at the Reformation period, the Belgic Confession, for example. The Belgic Confession is Guido de Bray's attempt to explain the Protestant Reformation to a Roman Catholic king. Many church fathers are attempting to explain what they're trying to do to others who don't understand. You can find it in the end of the book of Acts when the Apostle Paul makes his appeal to the governor. And the governor basically says, are you trying to convert me? And hey, if the Apostle Paul can't do it, how are we supposed to? But this is, in fact, the task of a Christian. And it's really the task of anybody if they want to live in one degree or another with productive harmony with someone else. Figure out how to communicate what you believe and see if you can see it from the other side. In the IDW protocol, we have steel manning and straw manning, and I think those are helpful things. But these conversations recently are illustrative of just how hard it is to talk about what's really most important. And so when Christians say urgent need to turn to God, what on earth does that look like? And I think in many ways the language just lends itself to the idea that God is a super thing, and we have to turn to this super thing and have this super thing do what? Relieve us of the virus, of the kinds of suffering that we have. Now, again, this works. And I think, Jordan Peterson's honesty had a great deal to do with this, because Jordan Peterson in his study of alcoholic treatment understood from Carl Rogers. Yes, a Christian conversion can get people sober, but I've seen many instances when Christians will basically argue with alcoholics and say, well, if you'd only turn to God, then it would all go away. And basically, well, you might say, well, isn't that what the 12 Steps program do? Yeah, but they provide a lot more, don't they? And it doesn't always work. What is it? 50, 60% effective often? And I've known a number of people who have been through it multiple times and it's never took. And again, this is not the kind of medical treatment we're satisfied with. We hope that, when these COVID vaccinations come, that they will be 95% effective. No matter what's in your head. And so for some of my modernist friends or some of my materialist friends, hey, you have a point. Is why would Jesus be less effective than a vaccine? And I think Christians have to deal with those questions credibly and honestly, because if we're not, we're simply not going to be compelling in any way, shape, or form. Now, on December 10, Anthony Bradley teaches religion, maybe sociology too, I don't know, religion at King's College in New York. And he had a tweet on December 9. It said, "Who are the Christian intellectuals with PhDs in the social sciences who draw young adult guys like Jordan Peterson does and can break down life and draw out the psychological implications of habits and behaviors? I'm with a college junior trying to figure this out. Help, haha, thoughts, names?" And when I looked at the list, someone had pointed that out to me. Many of my Twitter followers are very helpful in pointing out threads to me. And one of the real blessings of Twitter is that it's brief, unlike most of my videos. And I looked at the thread and I found a bunch of people I enjoy reading, a bunch of people I esteem, but none of them fit the category that Anthony Bradley was looking for. Well, why not? And in fact, most of those people didn't fit the category, in my opinion, of effectiveness that Jordan Peterson had. Why not? Now look at this. So I said, tweet it out. Look at this thread. Look at the weak answers. What does this tell you of the impotence and insularity of the church in the Western English language space? In some ways, the church is deeply struggling to figure out for a good number of people to help them see what possible good turning to God might result in. Now, Anthony Bradley responded to the tweet, and I'm not sure if he was responding to me. I think I probably got the most things downstream of his Twitter. He's got a bigger Twitter audience than I have. But, so he wasn't, I think in some ways I hijacked it and used it for other purposes necessarily than what he was doing. But to me, it made a point that I've been trying to make for the last 3 years. Now, just recently, as those of you who follow my channel closely know, I just finished Shantung Compound, a book by Langdon Gilkey, which I found it was a great read. I very much recommend it. Gilkey, of course, he's not an evangelical who's out there just trying to score points, okay? As we'll get into, his story is quite a bit different. And he writes about this compound, as the subtitle says, the story of men and women under pressure. Because here was a Japanese internment camp where, well, it wasn't brutal like what you'll find in Unbreakable, but basically you took some of the smartest, wealthiest expats from China and put them in a place with a degree of deprivation, and you had a remarkable cross sample of people. You had European Roman Catholics and monks. You had British business people. You had American evangelical and mainline missionaries, because by the middle of the 20th century, mainliners were doing missionary work, and it was only starting to change in the way that most mainliners today won't do missionary work in the way they did in the 19th century. What they'll go out and do is, in many cases, present a materialist frame, and that gets complicated too. Anyway, So a couple of pieces from the book. Now he's talking about how, which kind of people, which kind of skills when they came to the camp sort of manifest as useful. This view is possible, I discovered, only when material needs are so completely satisfied that they can be safely forgotten. He's talking about, he's dealing with religion and the relevancy of religion. And he noted that, well, when you got into a camp and material needs were no longer able to be taken for granted, that changed sort of the focus between, let's call it, pragmatic engaging of maintaining normal life, physical sustenance, yada, 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 and kind of these higher level religious conversations. I found that whenever this satisfaction was endangered, the importance of physical needs immediately became apparent to everyone. In the beginning, the men who made our camp civilization possible were the practical men who could learn quickly and efficiently to cook, bake our food, to repair our equipment, and cleanse our latrines. When the full impact of this important truth bore on me, I found myself facing a crisis in belief. He was raised in a mainline, what today we would call a mainline liberal Protestant context. But of course, liberal Protestantism in the first half of the 20th century was a very different thing from what it would become at the end of the 20th century. In my own life, I had already experienced some profound changes with respect to religion and its place. I had been brought up in a tolerant but strongly liberal religious home. I had early imbibed its ethical idealism. And so, when you see Americans, for the most part, presume religion is an ethical system, well, they come by this honestly because, as I talked about before, as we come out of deism, there's sort of this division that takes hold where religion sort of deals with morals and science deals with the practical things. And you can see that bifurcation here in Gilkey. Then, as a college philosophy major, seduced by the beguilement of Santayana, I had found religion of my youthful environment uninteresting, naive, and somewhat sentimental. You can have sentimentality in the mainline church just like you can in evangelical churches. Because of this, I took from my early environment only its ethical emphasis and left the religion aside. Why, I asked myself, add religious frills to the ethical commitments any unbelieving naturalist can easily avow? Cannot the modern agnostic intellectual be capable by himself of leading a creative and upright life devoted to the moral absolutes of peace in the world and justice in society? One might call this a collegiate idealism, resting uneasily on a naturalist base. And I think he really names that assumption well. And I think that has been, for many who have deconstructed and left Christianity, basically the predominant position. Now, obviously, after 9/11, after the rise of the new atheists, this sort of Christianity, I had a long conversation again with Topher today, and we're finally going to release those conversations, Topher the Salty from the Discord server. And I thought they were really great conversations, but this sort of becomes the default position. There's sort of a presumed naturalism with a humanist Christian value system that has been the predominant culture position of the West, and that's going away. But you noted that even when the celebrity atheists attacked Christianity, the only tools they had to attack Christianity with were Christianity's own tools. But you see right here in the middle of the 20th century, that hasn't quite fully developed yet. It was not that I thought religion wrong. I simply thought it irrelevant. What real function in actual life does it perform under circumstances when basic problems are dealt with by techniques and organizational skills? If the lights stay on, if if I don't feel any overwhelming injustice happening, if my basic needs are met, if I have bread and circuses, isn't that enough? I was quite willing to admit that there are people who are interested in the nature of man and in the universe, and that apparently there are others who enjoy religion and going to church. But unlike food and sanitation, which one must have in order to live, is not religion merely a matter of personal taste, of temperament, essential only if someone wants it, but useless if one does not happen to be the type who likes it? Again, this is by and large the default position of many in the affluent West in times of peace. Religion is a wonderful thing. Go ahead. Just keep it to yourself. And what you find with a celebrity atheist is it's always the political involvement that really sort of drives them out. And again, you can find that, go back to look at Justin Brierley and his conversation with the appearance on Unbelievable of Richard Dawkins. And you'll find that again and again. You'll find that in Rationality Rules crying game moment with Jonathan Peugeot. Surely you're not one of those who believes in a literal God. Well, please tell me, if God is not literal, then what does the word mean? And now you might say, well, wait a minute. Well, what is your definition of literal? And for many of us, the definition is material or particulate. Or, well, it's not particulate, it's of this spiritual substance, which is sort of what supernaturalism is, and it's kind of up there, and I don't believe in that substance at all. I believe in one substance from the bottom up. That's what I think we simply inherit from the culture. That's what we absorb, and we don't absorb it directly. It's our consciousness Congress is piecing this together, and as Dallas Willard makes the point in the Veritas Forum video that I used to play quite often, I'd always get the little copyright notes when I'd take a little clip from that video, and Dallas Willard notes that it's the student walking around the university. Of course, he taught philosophy at USC. It's the student talking around the university that elements of status sort of begin to edit their language, and well, we don't want to talk like this because I'll be associated with those people, and we should talk like this because I'll be associated with those people, and we see this now. I mean, in some ways, the whole sociological experiment of wokeness is just an experiment in status, because people walk around terrified that someone will call them a racist, so then they start using all of this other language because that puts them up the status. And if someone stops and says, hey, wait a minute, let's take a little closer look at some of that language, because that might not be the way you want to talk. No, but it gets me status, and it doesn't lose me status. So if sounding like a Christian makes me lose status, then, well, and evangelicals play the same game. We all play the same game because we're terribly conscious of status. As I asked myself these questions over and over throughout these first months at camp, I became what we might call secular. And I would say now again, that's sort of the secret second sister of the church. It's sort of Christianity without the church. Well, what Christianity? Well, is belief in God critical to it? No, not really. It's, in fact, not essential at all. It's sort of this adoption of Christian values, of human rights, and of all these things. That's secular. No, but I thought it was like this definition of atheism that's just that there is no God. Oh no, your beliefs. You're much more of a tar baby, and there's lots of things that are stuck to you, whether you like to notice them or not. That is, I was a man convinced that while religion, again, religion S, not W, religion S, religion has now been put into a little box. Now we have competing religions, as Tom Holland points out. That while religion might help those who liked it, it was a waste of time for others. Certainly the others now included myself. Now, here, of course, we wind up, or a good many people wind up in a meaning crisis. And we discover that, well, particles are sort of off the table. Particles form, but they're coming from something else. And I think deep in our imaginary, the foundation has to be like particles, just sort of like there's dust on the ground. But to challenge Gilkey, we might look at Dostoevsky, who himself was a terrific observer of human nature, and he himself, from in Russian exile up in Siberia, which in some ways is not necessarily that different. It was different, of course, but that different from sort of the compound that Langdon Gilkey was exiled in, but only for 2 years. Dostoevsky spent a lot more time watching this stuff, and in his book Notes from the Underground noted that I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I'm an unattractive man. I think there is something wrong with my liver. And again, if you don't have the time to go through Notes from the Underground, there's a wonderful little 10-minute summary of the book on YouTube. Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground in 10 minutes, and I'll put a link to it here. And if I don't, remind me in the comment section. But it all sort of reminds us what Jesus says when he's been fasting for 40 days, and the devil comes to him and says, "Turn stones into bread." Jesus says, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Now, if you chop off the second half of that, many of you know this. Many of you know this well, because, Tom Brady wins how many Super Bowls, and he's already been to Disneyland. He's already married a supermodel. He's already got, all this money. But then, of course, the Patriots won't renew his contract. And now I'm going to go to Tampa. Well, the age of decay catches up with you, my friend. It comes to all of us. And in this meaning crisis, many of us in this meaning crisis are doing pretty well, at least comparatively speaking. I mentioned before, I never knew of a suicide that happened in the impoverished communities of Haitians that I worked with. They didn't seem to be, for all of their sufferings, they didn't seem to be threatened by suicide. Now, I was really disappointed to see Rationality Rules. Well, maybe it's his day job, and maybe he's disappointed that I got up on Sunday and preached, because here another Jordan Peterson video, the Christ Whisperer, and somehow I'm going to put Jordan in all the same camps as Paula White and all those usual Christians. And yeah, I sort of want to do a video about, well, what on earth are we talking about with Christianity? Do we have the perspective of someone who comes from the Islamic or Asian world who would look at us and say, you're all Christians? Or just sort of within our own little world, because after all, you have a royal family that's the head of the Church of England. We don't. And yeah, Donald Trump and Paul White, this is his spiritual advisor. I don't think Donald Trump has a spiritual advisor. Donald Trump does what Donald Trump wants to do. And if you were to sit down to ask Paula White about adultery, she would probably give you a pretty standard Christian answer for all of the kind of shenanigans she does online or on TV, but she likely won't endorse adultery or sleeping with porn stars. And so, yeah, there's plenty to talk about there, but just kind of an unkind, uncharitable dismissal when you mostly want to talk about politics, because for the most part, you don't care what Christians think as long as they don't vote on it. Well, do you vote on your beliefs? My guess is yes. You seem to celebrate that. And Peterson, in many ways, yeah, I think Peterson's effectiveness that I comment about in Anthony Bradley's tweet. The more I see Peterson on Rationality Rules still 3 years later, well, part of it's just the algorithm. He's just getting his sweet YouTube monetization. But part of it is Peterson's effective. Peterson's extraordinarily effective. That's why you got to keep hammering at him. But yeah, keep drawing people's attention to him. They're gonna start watching his videos, and something's gonna click. His continued fixation on Jordan Peterson was because Peterson was the most effective Christ whisperer to a generation who found the church irrelevant. That's what I noticed. Now, Peugeot and Adam's conversation, I know Jonathan expressed frustration, and I think Adam has expressed frustration, but at least they both understood some sociology. And this was sort of a nice illustration because Jonathan doesn't frame it as sociology, although he understands sociology, and Adam doesn't frame it as religion, although, he certainly has experience with religion. Both Adam and Jonathan understand that worship is what's at the top of the hierarchy, and it pulls a community together. Even now below, this is basic Durkheimian sociology, and nobody's seriously challenging this. You might dismiss the validity of the stories or aspects of the stories, but you won't dismiss the fact that what it's doing to human beings and how human beings operate here below with respect to this. But for someone whose God is kindness, and that seems to sort of be the God of secular, it's the latent Christian values left in a secular society. He's extraordinarily dismissive of the many, many religious people. It seems a lack of basic compassion for the way billions of people have managed to maintain meaning and leveraged it against the suffering while they're trying to go through this painful world. Just open up Chris Arnotti's book on Back Row America. And my point that I've never known a homeless person who's an atheist. Well, why? Well, you might dismiss that as, well, that's just basically functionalism. But yeah, you know what? It works. And it doesn't have the same kind of side effects as drinking your life away. And yeah, a good many of them are both drinking and turning to God. And because they know I'm a pastor, and as I talk to them, I listen to that play out in their heads because they're debating and they're working it through. And you might say, oh, just throw away the drink. Yeah, and have the other kind of meaning crisis of the other kinds of people I talk to, and my channel is filled with those kind of conversations. Be serious. If your God is kindness, why don't you be kind to the far more than 5% of the people that are actually trying to get through this painful world and have legitimate sociological and injustice reasons for being at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they find meaning through religion, and so they do it. Oh, but just keep that out of the bowling booth. Give me a break. If you're going to be an elitist, just be an elitist and get rid of democracy anyway and just have your philosopher kings rule the nation. The problem you face is you're not going to talk all of these people who suffer out of the religion that is propping them up. And once you get them to a certain point in the status hierarchy, they'll likely have a meaning crisis of their own. It's a losing game. And as much as he likes to spout the nuns and the rise of the nuns in the Pew study, which he puts on this Christ whisperer thing, he nicely omits that these people, some of them identify as atheists, some of them identify as agnostic, but most of them, nothing in particular. And let me tell you what those nothing in particulars look like. Read Clay Rutledge. It's a bankrupt point. And that Jordan Peterson is generous to fundamentalists, it just shows he's actually kind and not just playing one when certain sexual minorities get popular and you can gain status by carrying their water. Yeah, this stuff gets me frustrated. Rationalism's petty solace would be arrogant self-regard of superiority. And when it just manifests itself in self-righteousness, nobody buys it unless you're in that tribe and spouting those things. It's just tribal. That's all it is. It's just another game. And it's not kind. If you're really concerned about justice and the underclass, why disparage the faith of the most religious demographic in America, who are African Americans, and add to them more people of color, like Asians and Hispanics? By and large, far more religious than white folks. With regard to the African Americans, why dismiss the one thing they stole from their slave owners that their masters could never steal back? Really? This is the kind approach to these people? I don't buy it. Yet my disappointment remains, and I own it myself with the church. As I said in my tweet when I put all this up, maybe I should grab it. This is what I tweeted on Saturday. While rationality rules might irritate me with his smug dismissal of the meaningful consolation of beleaguered, underprivileged masses of history, the impotence of the church to communicate their hope bothers me more. I won't have time in the next couple of days to sit down and make a video, which often means an idea for a video might not come to fruition. So what I often do is make a PowerPoint in the hopes that the muse will endure or even mature through the weekend. So then I basically left a rough draft of this, and I'm thinking of using my Patreon space to start posting drafts of, or at least PDFs of these videos, because you might have difficulty keeping up with all of my production, but one of the ways to understand some of what I'm talking about would be just to go to the videos and go through them, go through the PDFs and take a quick look at them. Maybe you can get some sense of where I'm going, but this is where I'm always trying to go. So yeah, someone like Stephen Woodford, I'm a little disappointed basically, because I really did think he was having a good faith conversation with Peugeot, and then this Christ Whisper video is just like, really? It just isn't serious. But yet, I look at the church and I think we're not being serious either. Turn to God. What is someone like? I know what people hear when we say that. It isn't often helpful. While pain remains a megaphone, and again, look at my conversation with Chris Arnott. That's a powerful book, Dignity, as is Hillbilly Elegy. I watched the movie, and I know the movie got bad reviews, but I watched the movie, and frankly, I thought, yeah, it's rough to watch, but as a pastor, and many of you know who grew up in households like that, that's what, life is rough. Dad might beat up on mom, but he's still your dad. Mom might beat up on you, but she's still your mom. Mom might go through serial men, and that might be a mess, and Meemaw might have messes of her own, but that's what you're like, and you've got to get through it. And how? And just to simply dismiss how billions of suffering people get through this world because of your politics? Unkind to the extreme. And, Chris Arnott growing up, and again, we went through his story in my video with him, and this is what a thoughtful person with an open mind and a kind heart begins to think about when they spend time with people who have really hard lives and, yeah, maybe make really crappy decisions again and again and again, but there's a reason their lives are shaped the way they are. It seems incumbent upon the church to do a better job connecting the dots and their account of the hope that lies within them. And we're watching others, Tom Holland and Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson, fit these things together. And, I just had 2 conversations with Topher that I'll probably post this tomorrow. Maybe I'll post this afternoon or tonight or tomorrow. Probably post this tomorrow morning, and then maybe Topher's conversation or both conversations a little later. I don't know. But, when I talk to someone like Topher, he's not a Christian. Does he believe in God? Well, maybe God in a Petersonian way. Maybe he understands how, but it's unclear, and he's honest. And he's talking, and he's listening, and he's doing the work. You want to use that phrase from the woke community? Topher's doing the work, and many others are doing the work. They're not just simply dismissive. They're listening. And I understand the difficulty of getting there from a materialist frame, turning to God that just evokes a whole imaginary that, quite frankly, you can find often in the church and has worked in many ways, and it's there. And I understand very well why a lot of other people are simply turned off by it. I know Adam didn't much appreciate it, but I thought, well, and here again, this is why I do the conversations I do. And you can go back and look at my conversation with Sevilla. You know, she is a tender, lovely person who is honest, but she's a therapist, and she's put in her time. And so on one hand, she is like many therapists. She's kind and sensitive and gentle. But on the other hand, she's been doing it a while. And so, you know, she has a spine too. And she's been on her own quest to figure out the world. And so she's, you know, really gravitated on Persig, Zen, and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And at the beginning of this video, I thought, wow, what a treat to be able to lay out her metaphysics of quality. I've never heard it quite so clearly, and really gave me an appreciation for the system that they're using, and the inorganic, then the biological, then the social, then the intellectual, basically kind of a 4-story framework, and the way it works together. And well, there's a frame. There's a pretty compelling frame, and something that's very useful for figuring out your world. The thing is, we all need a frame, and now we're pretty deep into the conversation frames. And here's a question: is Christianity a frame? Sort of. But where does the frame lie? And again, if you listen to Peugeot, well, he says, well, here's my frame, and Christianity fits into it. And, you know, again, even this frame language and models we're using this is imperfect as well. But one of the things that you note is that many people from many different cultures have become Christians. And of course that, you know, I want to be fair to rationality rules. Dealing with the label Christianity is no small thing. And in fact, if we pay any attention to Tom Holland's work, that too has to be conditioned in a way historically. And in fact, you'll find in the book of Acts that Christians, none of us see our frames as something we adopt. They're the lenses we look through to see the world. And so I'll get into this in a moment. There's a massive multicultural following through history of what we call Christianity. And if you want to be a settled Christian, it will need to reconcile it with your other types of frames. Now, again, I mentioned this the other day. I was reading Justin Martyr, and oops, I guess I didn't put the link in. Shoot. The beautiful thing about reading history is that you can sort of try to approximate going back into other people's frames. And this is exactly what has prompted Tom Holland to do the work that he's doing, because, and, you know, not just Tom Holland, but Mark Vernon, Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis. You read enough stuff from the past, and at some point, if you're a sensitive enough reader, you'll begin to realize that they're talking from different frames than we are. Well, I was going about one morning in the walks of the Sixtus, a certain man with others in his company, having met me, and said, "Hail, O philosopher!" And immediately after saying this, he turned around and walked along with me. His friends likewise followed me, and in turn, having addressed him, said, "What is there important?" And he replied, "I was instructed," says he. Basically, Justin Martyr is walking around, in the garb of a philosopher. Well, philosophers have garbs. Well, what is a philosopher? A lover of wisdom. That sort of Hellenism provided this context in which they had an ability to talk about frames and sort of hold it out there and find a middle space in which they can talk to one another. And that's something that we're looking for and needing and perhaps lacking. Now, it's interesting because Hellenism was a vibrant, multi-framed context. And that was the Eastern Roman Empire. And so they're likely speaking Greek, and they're in dialogue with Platonism, and Aristotle's floating around, and Neoplatonism is up there, and lots of different things going on. Now Hellenism, of course, was what the Jewish culture fight was about, and it was being opposed by the Pharisees. And Was Jesus a Hellenist? He certainly doesn't read to be that way. Was he soft on Hellenism? That's part of the charge against him. But Christianity manages to get into Hellenism too. And again, you can't read the church fathers and not note this. And this process has been going on and on and on. And so, you read Augustine. I made this comment the other day. You read Peter Brown's treatment of Augustine, and he embraces Christianity because it's better philosophy. Well, that's not why the Apostle Peter embraced Christian philosophy. That's not why people in jail embrace Christianity. That's not why the person in the 12-step program embraces Christianity. That's not why masses of people in Asia and Africa embrace Pentecostal Christianity. That's not why Paula White, let's include them in. That's not why Paula White embraces Christianity, even in her prosperity gospel sort of way. And if you think I'm sort of soft on prosperity gospel-ishness, well, we can have a conversation about that. But there's something going on with respect to frames here that is a lot deeper than politics. And it's even deeper than, well, I believe in this frame and I believe in that frame. Christianity seems to infiltrate these frames and do funny things to them, but to the degree that you can find materialists claiming to be Christians and Jonathan Pageauians, depending on how you want to categorize his frame. And he'd say, well, orthodoxy. Well, you'll find other people in the Orthodox Church that don't have a frame just like Jonathan Pageau's, and mine is probably a bit different. And here, Sevilla talks about how the metaphysics of quality made her a theist. And look at her conversation with Jonathan Pageau. Again, a really lovely conversation. And there's a lot going on here. And so when people come to me and say, well, you're trying to talk them out of their frame, I say, no, not necessarily. I might think that there are issues with their frame, and so let's have a conversation. I don't have the robes of a philosopher, and if I did, other people wouldn't want to talk to me. I have in a sense, the robes of a Christian minister, and we're just trying to find a space here in which we can talk and explore and find notes, because we want better frames. And so what's sort of happening is that as a culture, we're sitting in the optometrist chair. And now you notice I don't wear glasses. I don't wear contact lenses. I'm just now at the age of 57 are increasingly grabbing reading glasses. I've just been blessed with good eyesight my whole life. But, so now over the last couple of years, I get to go to the optometrist because my wife has worn glasses most of her life. She's like, you should go and make sure your eyes are healthy. Okay. So go to the optometrist and, a little bit of correction. And so I still don't wear glasses, but how about this? Can you see it now? What can you read? And this is sort of what we're doing with these frames. We're comparing notes and say, well, materialism sort of really helps make sense with this, but these pieces it doesn't make as much sense of. And I love Sevilla's comment that sort of you want the frame that most of your world can fit into. Well, fit into how? Well, fit into without bumping against the frame or having an elbow or having a head cut off or something like that. So you see I'm moving between frames of glasses and picture frames because, well, here's the picture frame. And so we just kind of cut this person out of it because they don't fit in the frame. Well, hopefully like Justin Martyr and Trifle, well, we can have a conversation and we can talk about this. And maybe we can establish a level of trust and respect where we can have a difference. And you can say, well, I'm a materialist. Okay. All right. I can understand that. I'm well versed in materialism. Part of me, a certain segment of my consciousness Congress are materialists too. It's just that there's some certain parts of the frame that don't fit in well. And so I'm continuing to listen. I'm continuing to try on different frames. Well, now this. Well, what about miracles? What fits in well with miracles? And what fits in well with something else? And how can we make this conversation? And how can we have this conversation go above just dismissive tribalism? Because that seldom gets us anywhere. But we're having this conversation in the midst of combinatorial explosion. The reason that we go to the optometrist is because everything is looking fuzzy and we don't know what to do. And I thought just, spending all day on computer games was going to be good enough. And well, I'm finding that this slow gray meaninglessness is sort of taking over my life. And Jordan Peterson shines a light on me and I get up out of my chair. Or Jordan Peterson shines a light on a bunch of people, they get up out of their chair and you think, my new atheism is under threat. I think your new atheism is under threat. I think it's going away. And so my talks with Topher and our second conversation, he's in his workshop where he's fixing speakers. And, it's just the point that I made to him towards the end of the second conversation is that, well, it's not really just the thought or the book or the writings or the videos or the articulation or the blog post or the podcast. The frames are manifest in a human life. And we might not even know we're wearing glasses. We might not even be conscious of the frames because, again, if you're wearing glasses and you only have one pair, when you take them off to look at them, they'll be fuzzy. And most of the time we develop our knowledge about frames, it's because we've at some point had to have different glasses on and we see part of the world over here with this pair. And, it's sort of like the bifocals they gave me. We need different glasses to see different parts of the world. Well, now I'm looking at this frame through this frame. Well, that's not fair to the frame I'm holding. So then I reverse it. Well, that's not fair to the frame I'm holding. And so we're going back and forth. And yeah, it's hard. But take your time. It's worth the process. Find good conversation partners. Find people you can trust. Find people who are going to be both honest and patient with you. That's what you want. But fundamentally, it's manifest in all of the decisions you make. Human agency is the most powerful compression algorithm imaginable. Frames get compressed and integrated without us even knowing they are. In fact, all this framing language, this is all just a model that's somehow tied to the rise of AI and philosophy and cognitive science and everything now. And this model will pass. It's not the model of Justin Martyr. It's not the model of the Apostle Paul. It's not the model of the Apostle Peter. It's not the model of Martin Luther or Pope John Paul II or Pope Francis or any of these necessarily. Well, some of these more modern is, yeah, but we're just trying to figure out our way through this thing. And life is hard and there is suffering and you're going to experience loss. Tensions get expressed, denied, and frustrated. And we're hardly conscious of what we're doing, but those of us for maybe the 10% of the population that are doing it, it's of vital importance if my world is going to be cohesive. Even though for the vast majority of people, this stuff just sort of comes up from below and colonizes us from within and takes up residence, and we might not even know it or even use these terms to try to deal with it. But again, the church is stumbling, and this isn't uncommon. We stumble before we can stagger, before we can walk. And usually we stumble to stagger and then stumble some more. And I want the church to do better. And so that's why I do this. So that was kind of ranty. But I've got some really interesting videos coming out, some really interesting conversations. And I know for many of you, the conversations, well, they're not to the point. They're not salient. And I get that too. But part of the reason I post them is they're salient to me, and in many ways, the final point that I made to Topher and that we talked about is that when someone tells us their story, well, it's relevant because I can find connections with their story, and there's elements of that story that connect with my story, and I listen to their frame, and maybe I just sort of reach into the glasses here and pull out Topher's eyeglasses and put them on and see what looks clearer. And we talk and we work and we try to figure things out. That's what we're doing. Maybe I'll post this now.